got their Hezbollah client, and they made exploding pagers for them. They put high explosives in part of the battery and a detonator in there. And basically, it was configured to detonate this thing after a specific message was sent to the pager. It was funny in some ways that this pager focus was entirely because they knew their cell phones were compromised. Like, oh, let's start using pagers. But they were moving away from one comms to another to avoid surveillance. And as a result, they got explosions.
When I look at that, I've always heard RIT guys always telling us, don't be buying shit off Amazon. If you're gonna get an iPhone cable, get it from the Apple store, not from Amazon. If you're getting Wi-Fi extenders, go from the manufacturer, not some shit on Amazon. Is China putting this shit into our ecosystem?
I doubt it. So these are highly targeted. So it's kind of
things like this.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it's good to think about it like let's step back to like a different type of crime, like pickpocketing versus like Ocean's 11 bank job, right? Mm-hmm. Like this is more on the the bank job, whereas pickpocketing, that's what you're more likely to experience as just a random individual. Like that's going to be more equal to like phishing emails, like really low grade commodity malware type stuff that's delivered over email. Like the risk of physically delivering this stuff is too high. Or in the case of like, oh, we're going to contaminate the shelves effectively, online or not. That's so high cost and so easy to find. That's like you just need one person to detect that this happened, and we'd all hear the news story. Which kind of reminds me of that Bloomberg grain of rice story, right? Which was complete bullshit. My friend Joe Fitzpatrick is a great guy to talk about this. But basically, there was this Bloomberg news story that a little grain of rice component was found implanted in a bunch of servers, right? And it just doesn't make sense, which is why that story didn't make sense, because there are so many other ways of approaching that are way less detectable. If there's anybody, like, how do you control where that goes? It's very hard to control where implanted hardware goes. And if you don't have control, anyone's going to find it. I think like the closest you can get to that might be that Israeli pager story, where they had to create a fake manufacturing plant to develop these things. And that is how they controlled where it went. So,
hold on. I'm not familiar with this.
Yes.
Go into this?
Yeah, totally.
This is the Israeli pager story where they blew up all the Hezbollah guys.
Yes, exactly. So
fascinating.
Thousands of pagers. I think it was a batch of 5,000 and 4,000 went out. So yeah, a lot of booms. But basically what they did is set up a fake manufacturing company, right? And I think they had their own manufacturing plant and everything. They licensed a legitimate model of pager from a legitimate company, well known. This is a typical relationship for a lot of hardware. You just license it and you sell it, and then you're like, yeah, put my name on it. Depends on what it is. Like obviously Apple's going to do their own thing, but we're talking pagers, right? This is like 30-year-old technology here. So they did that. They had a bunch of, they even went as far as getting a bunch of random customers and gave them good pagers. But then they got their Hezbollah client. And I'm always curious about how they did that. I have some postulations, but they got their Hezbollah client and they made exploding pagers for them. They put high explosives in part of the battery and a detonator in there. And basically it was configured to detonate this thing after a specific message was sent to the pager. And the way pager networks work are all like broadcasts, so you can send one message that goes to all pagers in the network, which is probably what they did. Anyway, this was in play for, I don't know, I think it was like 1 or 2 years. Like these were out there and slowly going through, the IT operations of, hey guys, we got new hardware, and slowly sending them out to the field. I think they were encrypted pagers. It was funny in some ways that this pager focus was entirely because they knew their cell phones were compromised. Like, oh, let's start using pagers, or maybe it was the walkie-talkies, I forget. But they were moving away from one comms to another to avoid surveillance, and as a result, they got explosions. But that's the kind of like level of control. Like if those got out to someone else, which I mean, there's still opportunity for that. Like they're not watching one pager go from hand to hand to hand. Like it's like, oh, we deployed it to Hezbollah, and it's reasonable to assume that this level of dissemination with this margin of error and other people touching them, and you know, they probably did the math on that, right? I didn't. But that's kind of a good example of like how far you can go and like the risks of discovery. Stuff like Stuxnet. Stuxnet's another good example of, I think it was the Iranian enrichment facilities where, oh, I can't remember the full story here, but there was like a thumb drive with a worm on it, and it basically got carried into this enrichment facility, and it would damage the part of the enrichment machinery, right? But didn't do it all at once. It would randomly pick one or the other because you don't want to be discovered, right? If you did it all at once, you're like, oh, something's up. It's like, oh, one went up, whatever, it must be bad, right? Like, so there's like the psychology of making sure it doesn't seem like it's something to investigate. It's like, oh, bad machines, it must be bad process. So they kept doing that, and eventually, I can't remember how it got discovered, but there was a issue where it started spreading around elsewhere, like the worm or something like that, and somebody noticed it, I think. I can't fully remember, but there was a discovery event because it kind of got too wide. And once it's discovered, okay, now you can defend against it. Now you can find them in the wild. And dude, the moment somebody found anything in our stuff, they're going to tell the world, like, hey, look at this cool thing I found. I'm a security researcher. So that said, on the flip side, there's plenty of places we don't look. Most of the stuff you find in there is just vulnerabilities. Like, oh, I didn't think there would be a hole on, I don't know, whatever, some aspect of a product. Like, oh, if you just log in 10 times and do this, you get in, you bypass everything. It's like, wait, what? You do what? That's the type of stuff that's typically, well, nobody thought to try that. So yeah, it really depends. Physical implants are much easier to discover because, I mean, they're physically there. You can't revoke them. You can't be like, oh, self-delete. It's there. I mean, not counting the pager situation. It's a different type of delete. But, you know, delete in a way that doesn't leave the evidence around.
Yeah. No matter where you're watching Shawn Ryan Show from, if you get anything out of this, please like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share this everywhere you possibly can. And if you're feeling extra generous, please leave us a review on Apple and Spotify podcasts.